Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi, how are you today? In this opportunity, we would like to say thank you for looking this video. It's great to see you all. First of all, let me introduce myself and my partner. I'm Nanda Amalia Putri. My partner are Dela Rosa, Deva Fitri Marfuatin, and Windi. We are from University of Singaperbangsa Karawang, study program English Language Education, and now we are in the 5th semester. You can see at the picture, what do you see in this picture? Yeah, in this opportunity, we would like to discuss about linguistic varieties and multilingual nation in the sociolinguistic. So, this material consists of 6 contents. The first content is vernacular languages. The second is standard languages. Third, lingua franca. Fourth, pidgins and creoles. And the last is origins and endings. The introduction of this material will be delivered by myself. My name is Nanda Amalia Putri. As we know that over half the world population is bilingual and many people are multilingual. People acquire a number of languages because they need them for different purposes. One language was his ethnic or tribal language, another was the language of his education, and another one served as a useful language of wider communication in particular contexts, such as the marketplace or with tourists. This material examines the labels and the criteria that sociolinguists use to distinguish between different varieties or codes in multilingual communities. I have one example to explain you more detail about what is multilingual or bilingual. There is Mr. Patel, who's Spice merchant who lives in Bombay. When he gets up, talks to his wife and children in Kathiawari, their dialect of Gujarati. Every morning he goes to the local market where he uses Marathi to buy his vegetables. At the railway station, he buys his ticket into Bombay city using Hindustani. The working person lingua franca. He reads his Gujarati newspaper on the train, and when he gets to the work he uses Kachi, the language of the spice trade. Although he knows enough English to enjoy an English cricket commentary on the radio, but he would find an English film difficult to follow. However, since the spice business is flourishing, his children go to an English medium school, so he expects them to be more proficient in English than he is. From the example, the fact that India is one of the most multilingual nations in the world is reflected in Mr. Patel's linguistic repertoire. With a population of over a billion, Indians use hundreds of different languages. The exact number depends on what counts as a distinct language, and what is rather a dialect of another language. With this kind of linguistic diversity, it's easy to understand the problem facing the country at the national level. From the example that I explained before about Mr. Patel, we know that India has a lot of languages and dialect. And from that fact, emerged a question like, should a country use the same language for internal administration and for official communication with other nations? Which language or languages should be used by the government and the courts? In order to assess the relative claims of different languages, it is necessary to look at their status and the function which they serve. Sociolinguists have developed a number of ways of categorizing languages. According to their status and social function, the distinction between a vernacular language and a standard language is a useful place to start. So, in this time, I would like to discuss about vernacular language and standard language more detail. Here we go. We are now in the first contents and we are going to talk about vernacular languages. This first contents will be delivered again by me, Nanda Amalia Putri. So, here we go. A vernacular language or non-standard dialect is a native dialect or form of speech of specific people or a specific region. These languages are also known as ethnic languages, and they are more spoken than formally written and are endemic in specific society. Vernacular is the language or dialect spoken by the ordinary people of a country or region. In addition, the language is spoken as one's mother tongue, not learned or imposed as a second language. A vernacular language itself has three components of the meaning. The first component is the most basic, refers to the fact that a vernacular is an uncodified or unstandardized variety. It's like this component have been most widely used as the defining criterion, but emphasis on one or other of the components has led to the use of the term vernacular with somewhat different meanings. The second refers to the way it is acquired in the home as a first variety, and the third is the fact that it's used for relatively circumscribed function. We are going to talk about an example of vernacular language. Indonesian is used as the official language. In Indonesia, there are so many different ethnic and cultures, so Indonesia have a lot of various languages. For example, like Sundanese is used by Sundanese people, Javanese is used by Javanese people, and the other of languages. So, the language like Sundanese or Javanese is called vernacular language or local language because it's used for daily communication at home and with close friends. And of course, they will use Indonesian as the official language. So, the language used by a person depends on the context. Finally, the term vernacular is sometimes used to indicate that a language is used for everyday interaction without implying that it is appropriate only in informal domains. Vernacular itself simply means a language which is not an official language in a particular context. When the people talk about education in vernacular language, for instance, they are usually referring to education in an ethnic minority language in a particular country. The vernacular is the variety used for communication in the home and with close friends. It is the language of solidarity between people from the same ethnic group. The second content that will be discussed is standard languages, and it will be discussed again by me, and it is the last content that will be delivered by me. Standard language is the variety of a language that is considered as a better one for its phonological, lexical, and grammatical correctness. A standard language is generally one which is written and which has undergone some degree of regularization or codification, for example, in a grammar and a dictionary. We all should know that language might also be varied according to whether it is perceived to be correct or not. In regard to this view, terms standard and non-standard variety of a language are applied. A standard language is developed as a result of socio-political process. It's not entirely the same as the formal variety of a language. A standard variety of a language includes both a formal and informal or colloquial variety. However, the language is used in the formal occasion is often characterized with the use of standard forms. Thus, in regard to the occasion where the variety is used, the standard language variety might be associated with the formal variety. Furthermore, it is a language variety used by a group of people in their public discourse. There are three characteristics of standard language. The first is a recognized dictionary, like spelling and vocabulary, and the second is recognized grammar. The last is a standard pronunciation, like educate speech. We have an example of standard language. Standard English is that variety of English which is usually used in print and which is normally taught in schools and to non-native speakers learning the language. It's also the variety which is normally spoken by educated people and used in news broadcasts and other similar situations. For example, like this, there are non-standard English and standard English. Non-standard English, like my sister, she works and she lives out with the town, is obviously a non-standard English as it's filled with the use of a non-standard preposition. But my sister works and she lives outside the town is standard, and such a sentence can be found with the most English user. The former one is common only to speakers of Scottish English. Nah, Based on this, the word fun will be regarded as a standard word because it's learned by the native speaker at school and it's printed in the newspaper, magazine, or official documents. However, a word with similar meaning, crack is probably considered as non-standard because it's used exclusively by Irish English speakers. Besides, the word is not the one that is taught to English learners in Indonesia, China, Jordan, and in all other parts of the world. Therefore, most people would agree that crack is a dialectical variety. Another example, the use of have to children is standard such a press is print and introduced to English learner at school. I think that's enough for me. And the next content will be delivered by Dela Rosa. Thank you.
My name is Dela Rosa. I will be explaining word analysis. While the standard dialect developers of develop, it generally provide a very useful means of communication across area of dialect diversities. In status as a prestige, variety guarantees it will suffer. Standard analysis has served as a useful variety for communication between areas of dialect diversities, not only within Britain but also in countries where the British have had a colonial influence. Local varieties of analysis with distinctive language features have developed in many multilingual countries such as Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, and many African countries, whereas Alice has served an valuable language of wider communication in a multilingual.
Lingua franca. A lingua franca is a language used for communication between people whose first language differ. Between the Colombian Indians, Tucano is the main lingua franca and it can be used with Indians who live in the far-west area of the northwest Amazon on the both side of the border between Colombia and Brazil. If Indians want to communicate with non-Indians in the area, they need a second lingua franca. Since North India clearly led Tucano. Colombia used French and Brasilia used Portuguese. For example, in the 1960s, a Catholic nun, Sister Dominique, was sent to Rome for a meeting between nuns for different countries. She spoke no Italian, but she had been managing pretty well with her praying and Alice until she lost her voice one evening. She simply could not explain what had happened to the local police officer. A priest overheard, struggled, and came to her rescue. They proceeded to explore their linguistic repertoires, trying to find a language they shared. He came from Brazil and spoke Portuguese and French, but he had been living in Rome for some time, and so he was by then familiar with the local variety for Italian. Finally, they found a language in which they could communicate Latin. The next example, in the heart of the northwest Amazon near the border between Colombia and Brazil, there is a group of Indians who live along the Fafes River. The river is their food source as well as their communication line with other Indians and the outside world. Kyuka is a young Indian girl who lives with her family and 5 other families in the longhouse on the river. The language of her longhouse and the language she learned first is her father's language, Tuyuka. In a sense then, In the community, the father's language is what is usually referred to as the mother tongue. I, the first language learned, Kyuka has learned her mother's language. Venera as well, however, and speaks fluently Sinau some, Spanish, which she learned from a couple of the other men who spent to working on rubber plantation when they were younger and returned to the longhouse. And she knows Kyukano, the language used along the river to communicate with Indians who do not speak the longhouse language. Okay, the next slide will be explained by Deva.
In some countries, the most useful and widely used lingua franca is an official language or the national language. In Tanzania, for instance, Swahili is the language people tend to choose first when they are speaking to someone from a different tribal group. In Papua New Guinea, there are talk-facing and hearing multilingual, which are widely spoken as the lingua franca. There are also former Soviet Union countries that use Russian language, and the last, Arab, which use a variety of classical Arabic and the holy language of Islam as their lingua franca. For example, in West Africa, Hausa is learned as the second language and used in Norway every marketplace. And East Africa, Swahili is the most widely used trade language, and it was this debate that it was known and used so widely, which led the Tanzanian government to select it for promotion as the country's national language. There have been many successful attempts to create a language for communication between people who use different languages. And from a linguistic and sociolinguistic point of view, the most interesting lingua franca in many respects are Pidgin and Cree language. Next is Pidgin and Cree. For the first, I will explain about Pidgin. Pidgin is a language which has no native speaker. Pidgin developed as a means of communication between people who do not have a common language. Pidgin seems particularly likely to arise when two groups with different language are communicating in a situation where there is also a third dominant language. For example, on Caribbean slave plantation in the 17th and 18th centuries, West African people were deliberately separated from others who used the same language, so as to reduce the risk of their floating to escape or rebel. In order to communicate with each other as well as with their oppressors, they developed pidgin based on the language of the plantation bosses as well as their own language. Besides that, pidgin reflects its use as a means of communication between traders. It might derive from the word business, as pronounced in Christian English, which developed in China, and the meaning is paying money. They are typically used for quite specific functions like buying and selling grain or animal hides, rather than to signal social distinction or express politeness. Consequently, the structure of a pidgin is generally no more complicated than it needs to be express this function. Nobody uses the pidgin as a means of group identification or to explain social distance, and so there is no reason to maintain referentially redundant feature of language or complicated pronunciation whose main purpose is to signal how well educated you are. Pidgin language are created from the combined effort of people who speak different language. All language input might contribute to the sounds, the vocabulary, and the grammatical features, but to different extents, and some additional features might emerge which are unique to the new variety. The proportion of vocabulary in Pidgin consists of lexifier language or superset, that is the language which supplies most of vocabulary, and consists subset, that is the language which includes the grammatical structure. For example, Tok-Phaisin language consists English of about 77% as the lexifier language, and consists the local language called Tolai about 11% as the substrate. Pidgins tend to have a simplified structure and small vocabulary compared with fully developed language, because Pidgin input to serve a very narrow range of functions in a very limited set of domains. The Pacific language has only 5 vowels, for example, A, E, I, O, and U, compared to about 20 in the most varieties of English. Consonant clusters tend to be simplified. Example P, E, S for face, or vowels are inserted to break them into 2 syllables. Example sleep for sleep. Affixes are dispensed with, so words generally do not have inflection, as in English, to mark the verb or to signal the tense of the verb. Not all affixes use to mark gender, as in Spanish and Italian. Often the information affixes convey is signaled more specifically elsewhere in the sentence, or it can be deduced from the context, or it is referentially redundant. Every learner or friends of Spanish, for example, know that the grammatical gender of object is strictly dispensable if you are interested in communication as opposed to impressing people. For Pidgin advantages, Pidgin is easier to learn and to use for the speaker, and for disadvantages for Pidgins, a greater burden on the listener, and Pidgins are difficult for the learner. And this is the example of Pidgins and the translation in English. Okay, that's enough from me, and the next material will be presented by Windi.
My name is Windi. I would like to explain about Creole. A Creole is a pidgin which has acquired native speakers. Many of the languages which are called pidgin are in fact now Creole language. They are learned by children as their first language and used in a wide range of domains. Tok-Phaisin is one obvious example of a pidgin which has developed into a Creole language. As a result of their status as some group first language, Creoles also differ from pidgin in their range of functions, in their structure, and in some cases in the attitude expressed toward them. A Creole is a pidgin which has expanded in structure and vocabulary to express the range of meanings and serve the range of function required of a first language. For the example, an example from Tok-Phaisin can illustrate the process by which a Creole develops systematic ways of constantly expressing additional meanings as the demands made on the language by the speaker increase. Tok-Phaisin at different stage. Sentence A. By you go, you will go. B. By you go, you will go. C. By you go, you will go. D. You by go, you will go. And E. You've go, you will go. In this pidgin stage, reference to future event, Tok-Phaisin used the adverb by, which derived from the English phrase by and by. This is illustrated in sentence A. By you go. As the pidgin developed into a Creole, the adverb gradually shortened to by or by, as in sentence B and C. Sentence D illustrates as alternative position used for by, and sentence E show how it eventually becomes attached to the verb as a regular prefix signaling future tense. Phasing become more structurally regular as they undergo creolizations, the process by which a phasing becomes a creole. The list in table illustrates a linguistic strategy which regularizes the structure of words with related meaning, and so makes the form easier to learn and easier to understand. Talk phasing forms. Talk phasing big, English big or large. Talk phasing become, English to enlarge make large. Braid, wide, braiden to make wide, widen. Down, long, downing to lower. Nug, bed, nugadum to spoil the mate. Afraid, afraid, freedom to frighten, scare. Dirty, dirty, and dirty. The meaning relationship between the word in the first column and the third column is actually the same, and this is reflected in the form of the Creole, but not in English. If you knew the Tokfasian word for hot was hot, you could predicate that the word meaning to make hot or too hot will be hadam. You can similarly guess that the English verb missing from the list above is too dirty or make dirty. Notice that English is nowhere near so regular in form, while we can sometimes find patterns like black, blacken, soft, soften, wide, widen. It is not long before an irregular form trips up the unwary learn of English. While there is a word southern in English, there is no word long for instance. The functions, the phasing develop into a Creole. Once a Creole has developed, it can be used for all the functions of any language, politics, education, administration, original literatures, and so on. Talk phasing is frequently used as the language of debate in the Papua New Guinea parliament, and it is used for the first 3 years of education in many schools. Creoles have become a captive standard and even national and official language. The attitude talk considered attitude to Creoles are often as negative as their attitude to phasing. Nevertheless, the majority of the people who are monolingual in the Creole express strong loyalty to it as the language which best expresses their feeling. Talk phasing has status and prestige for people in Papua New Guinea who recognize its usefulness as a means of communication with a wide range of influential people as well as in getting a decent job. It is also a language of solidarity between Papua New Guinea with different vernaculars. And the last, origins and endings. But the fact that similarities have been found between phasing from quite different geographical regions and in phasing where quite different languages have contributed to their development suggests things are not quite so straightforward. Some have argued that all phasing and Creoles had a common origin. They claim that most phasing can be traced back to a single 15th century Portuguese phasing, and perhaps further to a Mediterranean lingua franca, saber. Others argue that each phasing rises and develops independently. They account for the similarities by finding two types of constraint on their development which they all share. There is almost as much debate about what ultimately happens to a Creole. There are a variety of answers depending on the social context. When a Creole is used side by side with the standard variety in a community where social barriers are not insuperable. Features of the Creole tend to change in the directions of the standard variety. This process is described as discreolization. Linguistic level, the variety closest to the standard and acrolate, where acro means high, whereas the variety closest to the Creole is labeled the Basilic or Deep Creole. These two varieties are often mutually unintelligible. Varieties in between these two extremes are described as Macaulay or intermediate varieties. For the example, can be found in Jamaica and Guyana. So in Guyanese Creoles, the acrolic tail form "I told him" used by educated middle class people has a mesolactal form "I tell him" used by lower middle class people, and a basilactal form "me tell used by old and illiterate rural laborers. Thank you for listening to our presentation. I hope what we have shared will be beneficial for all of us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. For the example, can be found in Jamaica and Guyana. So in Guyanese Creole, the acrolactal form "I told him" used by educated middle class people has a mesolactal form "I tell I'm" used by lower middle class people, and a basilactal form "me tell I'm" used by old and illiterate rural laborers. Thank you for listening to our presentations. I hope what we have shared would be beneficial for all of us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for listening to our presentation. I hope what we have shared would be beneficial for all of us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for listening to our presentation. I hope what we have shared would be beneficial for all of us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.